I thought I would tell you about a few really pivotal foundation forming moments for me of why I became a probably lifelong cat rescuer. The first one was when I was going to be 16 in a month, and I volunteered at an adoption event for Christmas that they were having at the old Orem Animal Shelter. Very little awful animal shelter with a very high kill rate. This was, years ago. Oh, I remember what year it was. It was 2001 because it had just been September 11th, a few months before. Yeah. So it was a while ago, and back then the little shelter was old and decrepit, and no one came there, and it was just awful. But best friends in northern Utah, which was No More Homeless Pets probably at that point, from Salt Lake, they decided to come down and they would advertise and they would try to make a really big deal of it. I think they put it on the news, like, we're going to have an adoption event here. Utah County has a hard time, but we're gonna this is gonna be so good for Christmas. There's kittens, there's puppies, there's dogs, cats, come. And so I went to volunteer, and I made blankets. For all the cat cages, and I spent the whole day in there in the cat room. I still remember, for years I remembered like which cats were in which kennels, but I don't remember that exactly anymore. I remember some of them, but I remember the layout of the little cat room, and maybe there were like, I don't know, 30 cages. And I put towels in there, and I petted the cats, and I just really tried to give them a good day. No one came to the adoption event. That's not true. I think there was one puppy that was adopted, and maybe a Rottweiler, if I'm remembering right, or they came to claim one. Anyway, no one came and looked at the cats. Only one puppy out of a few of them got adopted. So it was a hard day. It was really traumatic for me because I knew all of those cats that I'd spent the day with were going to die. And all of the ones in that room were friendly and healthy as far as I could tell. Like, they were fine. They were really cute cats. I remember there's a Persian mix, and I remember there's some like Maine Coon tabby looking kittens, and I mean all different colors, Siamese, orange, all different colors of cats. Really, really wonderful ones, and all different ages. And I just knew, like, they were gonna die. And the volunteer or the employees that came down to kind of host this and help the shelter employees were like, okay, call some rescues and see if some rescues have room. None of the rescues had room. They kind of looked at them like, well, that's not going to make any difference. There's not any around here, and the ones up in Salt Lake aren't going to probably come down. Like, it's, all of the shelters had a hard time at this point, and so they tried anyway, and they called, and no one. And so I called my friend and was like, see if your parents will let you foster some kittens, and they wouldn't. And we were leaving like the next day to go on a week-long trip to Florida, and it was so exciting. It's Disney World. We were going to swim with dolphins. Like, it was a really cool trip. September 11th had just happened a few months before, and of course when they reopened the airlines, no one wanted to fly, including me. I was afraid of flying anyway as a kid, and so the plane tickets were really cheap, and so my parents were like, okay, this is our chance, let's go to Florida. And so I couldn't take any cats. By the time I got back, they would all be gone because they're not going to stay there for a week, and I couldn't think of anyone that would hold on to them for me for a week. There's nothing I could do, and it put a damper on the trip, as did the fear of flying, but it definitely put a damper on the trip. And I decided then, this was the analogy I came up with then. I'm not going to be a tiny little like ripple, tiny little drop into the pond, like causing an effect Like, I'm not going to be a little raindrop into a pond. I'm going to be a giant ripple. Like, I'm going to be a giant wave into the pond of this problem, causing a big effect, making a big change, making a big difference. I wish I was talented enough artistically to like draw that out for you, but that was my analogy at the time. It was like, I'm going to be not a tiny ripple of change in the pond of problems, but I'm going to be a big ripple, a big tidal wave. And I feel like I've done a lot through the years, and I feel like it can really have downsides on your life, and you have to be really careful to be balanced when you're a rescuer. But that one event really changed things for me, and I saw how big the problem was. And now there's a new shelter, and it's not great, but the euthanasia rate isn't nearly what it used to be. And we've come really far. And I've been around long enough to know that, and that gives me hope. But we still have a long ways to go. Okay, I thought I would have the valley behind me this time, since it's pretty too, instead of the mountains. All right, so the second one is really... Let me turn on my car. So the second one is really sad and emotional. I was a little girl. I was probably like 8 or 9. I was not very old. Old enough, like young enough that you don't really get a control or say in what happens, which is really hard. So there was this cat, and I named him Tommy, which I've named a lot of tomcats over the years, but I named him Tommy, and he was a scruffy orange tomcat, orange tabby, and he had 2 different colored eyes. He had a green eye and a blue eye, which, if you know cats, you know how rare that is, like, especially for just an orange cat. It was very rare. And he was really nice, but no one had fixed him. There was more land around us back then. And we didn't quite know who he belonged to, and we should have just taken him in to get him fixed. But he would beat up our cats a lot, and he kind of he would get eye infections and look kind of sickly, and he would get like battle wounds from fighting, and he would beat up our cats. And so my parents didn't like that, and my mom was always one to really try to take them in and help them and rescue them. My dad just got really sick of it. He got really sick of our cats getting beat up, and the cat would also come around and spray. And I still don't know why my mom didn't just take him in and get him fixed, because she did that with a lot of other cats. But for some reason, this one was just a problem. And so, are you trying to tell a story too? I'm telling a story. So, I loved this cat, right? I love this cat. I think I named him Chrissy before I knew he was a tomcat. Anyway, he was really sweet. And so my dad decided one day he was too big of a problem, and we weren't going to spend the money to pay for all these vet bills, because he had runny eyes and he had battle wounds and he wasn't fixed. So he was going to take him to the shelter. The shelter back then was really not a good place. Even now, a cat like that, at a lot of shelters, it wouldn't be good. But back then, it was really not good. So my dad decided to take him to the shelter. And there was nothing I could do to stop it, because I'm a little kid. And if you've seen Beethoven, where the kids run behind the dad as he's driving away, and they're like crying and yelling after him and chasing him down the road behind his car, that's what I did. My dad drove him away to the shelter, and I ran behind the car, chasing him, screaming and crying. And I was so upset. And I vowed then and there that when I was older and I had a choice, that I would not do that. That I would just take him in and get him taken care of, or find some kind of resource or rescue group or something, that I wouldn't make that choice. And there weren't as many resources back then, but still, I vowed that when it was my decision and I was in charge, I would help cats like that, and I wouldn't let them go get killed. And that would never happen when it was me
making the choices. And so that was a really pivotal moment. And I've always remembered that, like, okay, do I have the ability to do this? Like, is this, if a cat shows up on my doorstep that needs help, am I going to make the right choice? And that's always really motivated me. Okay, so another part of that story, I was so upset that I went to my kind of tree house, which is my neighbor's field, and I was going to stay there. I was going to camp out there, run away, and not come home for so long that they'd be really worried and that they'd serve them right, And it didn't last very long because our horses got out of our corral. And they got out from the barn area and they were running through the backyard. So I had to run into the house and say, the horses escaped. And then we had to go catch them. And so my time running away and teaching my parents, a lesson of not to do that was cut very short. And my parents took in a lot of pets, and my mom actually took a lot of pets to the vet, and like they did a lot of good things. But that one situation, and I think there was another cat that they took up to the Humane Society that they tried to help, but I wanted to do more. And so that traumatic experience really catapulted me into helping more as I got to be a teenager and as I grew up. And then I had more and more experiences along the way, but that was one that was really foundation forming. Okay, the last quick one that I'll mention is that we had horses growing up, like I just said in the last story, and so we would go to get hay at different farms, and quack and quack quack, yeah. So we would go get hay at different farms, and there would be farm kittens sometimes. Like I remember one was a really sick. And I really wanted my mom to bring it home, and she said, well, it's theirs. And anyway, so we didn't, but I always thought about that kitten, and I found some other little kittens that were like 4 weeks old, and they hissed, they kind of popped, like that popping, hissing sound when you picked them up because they were scared. They were already turning feral. But I found them, and I held them, and then I remember at one place there was a little tiny dead kitten in the hay. By where we were loading up hay bales, and I was like, oh, if I could just like figure out how to get them all and get them fixed so there weren't so many kittens just everywhere out on the farm being sick and being dead, and if I could figure out how to and then later in life, here I am with Trap Neuter Return for feral cats, and I fixed so many barn cats. And it's not that barn cats can't have a good life, it's just if there's uncontrolled amounts of kittens everywhere, that there's such a high mortality rate, and you've got to get them fixed. You've got to get them fixed and vaccinated and under control. And so to be able to do that in life, now that I'm older and that I can and that I have that ability, now that I'm not a little kid anymore, has been a really rewarding thing to